when Pilate is speaking to Jesus before he has officially sentenced him to be crucified, and Pilate says, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" And Jesus replied, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." We're talking about the recent video where George Floyd in Minnesota or Minneapolis was basically killed, murdered. And I spent a lot of time meditating on this because what I see is typical, that the media reports on a portion of the truth. And it's the portion that stirs up the most emotion, because it appears as though media has become a big business. And when people are emotionally stirred up, then they're vulnerable to influence. Because as we know, when we get emotionally stirred up, we don't perceive the truth that well. But our goal is to recognize the truth. So I want to make a claim that may be controversial, which is I don't see racism at the center of this, because I have had to meditate and examine how does it happen that a man who is handcuffed is face down on the pavement with 4 large men, police officers, kneeling on him. It doesn't make sense. I mean, when somebody is handcuffed, they are relatively powerless, but they can still resist. And what the media has not shared with us in this story is what exactly was the reason for the initial altercation. Does anybody know? I mean, I'm sure some people know, but I don't know. Why was this man, George Floyd, pulled over, or why was he handcuffed? The focus has been all that, the lives of black people matter. Yes, the lives of all people matter. But how do we get to a point where there's some sort of an altercation, and then a man is handcuffed to be arrested, and then he experiences 4 officers kneeling on him, one directly on his neck, and then he pleads for his life and he dies, suffocates. Well, what I realized is that in order for a handcuffed man to be overcome and to be treated that way, he had to have been resisting. And why would he be resisting when he's already handcuffed? Somebody who understands that when you're handcuffed, it doesn't make sense to resist because you're mostly powerless. So then there becomes a question as to why would somebody resist authority when they're in such a helpless position? And now we start to understand the fundamental spiritual disease that exists in our culture, which is authority. So here I am trying to understand, what does a man gain by resisting authority when in a compromised position? Somebody with common sense would go, okay, I'm going to get arrested and I'm going to go through the system and, it'll all get worked out. But we know from listening to, black people, and not just in this country, any country where there's been slavery, that black people do not have faith in the white man's justice system. With good reason. And why? Let's go even deeper. Where did this dynamic begin? Well, look at the beginning of the relationship between black and white people in this country. Turns out it's the same in many countries, in the UK, in much of Europe, in Canada, Brazil. You have the roots of these two cultures coming together in a clash of authority. You have slavery. I mean, the black population in America essentially came out of a population of slaves. That was how black people integrated into this American culture. And that went on for hundreds of years. We're relatively new to come out of it. But when we start to explore, why do I have problems in certain behavioral situations? we look back to our roots and we try to understand, what did I not learn that I should have learned? What did I not get taught that was supposed to have been taught to me from an authority of love? So you have, generation after generation, the residual effects of one culture being under the authority of another, being abused, being mistreated, being disrespected, not provided education, not provided proper nutrition. And so you have a culture that has been raised up over the last 150 years with the residual of this defiance towards authority. Is it correct to defy the authority? Well, that's not the issue. The issue is, what is driving this defiance of authority? What's driving the defiance of authority is an anger at not being respected, not being treated right. You can't bring somebody from another country to your country and say, you have to work for me for no money, I'll give you a little bit of food, and if you don't do what I say, I'm going to beat you, and I might kill you, and I might torture you. So that is not right. There is no part of that that is correct. So the pride, the good pride in any human being is going to try to defy that. And if you can put aside the fears of being labeled racist, you can notice the difference in the cultures. You can notice this defiance of authority that exists in black culture. And I'm going to say for good reason, because authority from their earliest moments was not to be trusted. Now, one of the problems that I learned from being a minister in prisons, and you know the statistics, you have a much greater population of black men in prison than white men. And why is that? Because the defying of authority leads to bad decisions and leads to certain criminal activity. And what is the number one cause of people not respecting authority is not having been taught at an early age to respect authority. And what is the primary condition in black culture in America that has led to that? The absentee father. And why are fathers absent? Because they are not given the same opportunities to earn a living and to thrive in a culture where they are perceived as less. And so the developing ego in the man does not able to provide for his family, so then he abandons the family and has to figure out a way how to make it on his own. When you have a father that's not present, you have young men who come into their teenage years with a natural tendency to rebel because the teenager is outgrowing childhood and coming into an awareness of their own independence. And that is the time when a young man must learn how to respect certain authorities. Even if the authority is abusing power, it is not wise to go head to head against that power, but to do as Martin Luther King said, or Gandhi said, or Jesus, which is you defy power through nonviolent protest. But what you see in people who have been raised without a strong male role model is an explosive hatred towards authority. The hatred that somebody would be telling you what to do and when to do it and how to do it. So if you fast forward to the present and we hear about all these stories about, here's a man running away from the cops and he's unarmed and we have video of the policeman shooting him in the back. Why is that? Well, look at the dynamic. It's the same dynamic when you saw the face of Derek Chauvin, this police officer that's now who's now arrested and will be tried for murder. What I saw in his face is that this person will not defy my authority. I will hold them down to prove to him, to show him that I'm in charge here. Is that a racist thing? Well, I don't know, to be honest with you, but I'm not going to jump to the conclusion because follow the logic. If they get somebody in handcuffs and they put him in the car, then he goes off to the station and they book him and he goes through the process. But if deep inside his DNA goes, I must defy this authority in order to maintain my dignity. So even though I'm handcuffed and I'm laying on the ground, I'm still exerting a certain resistance as an act of self-preservation. And then on the other side, you have this untransformed, call him barbaric, individual who goes, I'm going to teach you. I am going to place my knee on your neck to demonstrate the power that I have over you. And because that person does not have the appropriate spiritual development, they don't have a limit because their ego is engaged. Both people's egos are engaged. So when you begin to explore this dynamic, it really helps you see also why so many people are resistant to the idea of God. Because God is the ultimate authority. And we as a species have such a huge problem with the possibility that we will be told what to do, that we will be told what we cannot do, when we can do it. I mean, you're on the spiritual path. If you're totally honest, you're going to have to admit, yeah, like, how much am I willing to surrender? What does it mean to surrender to the will of God? What comes up in me when I think about the possibility of surrendering to an almighty authority? Distrust, fear, I'm going to be exploited, I'm going to have to give in times that I don't want to, I'm not going to get the things that I need, I'm not going to be honored, I'm going to be, and on and on. Because that is the state that I see in humanity. You have it magnified 100 times in cultures that have been enslaved. Now, there's a temptation to go, the black people were shipped from Africa and they're the victims to slavery, to the more evolved technological whites, whether it be in the 1600s where they had the ships and they could show up and they had guns. But if you do a history on Africa, you'll see that within the African continent, they had been enslaving each other and selling slaves to other countries for a long time, possibly thousands of years. So really, it's not fair to place the blame on this culture or that culture. But the blame is on humanity that has a real difficult time with authority, that takes tremendous glee egotistically from having power over people. I mean, that is a huge aspect of this earth. Look at how many countries are led by people that are just frothing with love of power. So that's the issue that I want us to resolve. Now, it starts off by resolving it within yourself. Somebody has to teach you that God is an authority of love. An authority of love, yes, at times places restrictions upon behavior because the behaviors that is restricting are not good for you. When somebody has a figure in their life, and it turns out that boys tend to take this lesson better from men, and that man says, you cannot do these things, and if you do them, you will experience bad consequences. And if that boy respects and feels loved by that man, he will learn how to respect authority. And then as he grows up, if he experiences authority that's not based in love, he will have the wisdom to go, how am I going to negotiate this? Does it make sense when a police officer pulls me over who has the authority of law enforcement, maybe the most untransformed and brutal man standing before me? Am I going to defy that authority? No. That is a bad decision. Unless my dignity depends upon me not being seen as exploited by this authority. And I really see that in the culture, in the black culture that is still recovering from having been enslaved, refusing to acquiesce to the white authority. Does that mean George Floyd should have done what the officer said? I don't know, because we don't have the whole story. But I want to turn the discussion away from police hate blacks, which I don't believe is true, to we have an authority issue. We have a culture, global culture, that is not teaching how to be a loving authority and how to respond to a loving authority. So you have a huge amount of people that are not really interested in God because at a deep, deep level, they're not willing to surrender to an authority. I want to be a witness to the fact that when you surrender to the authority of love, you will be free. Because we as humans do not know what God knows, what love knows. We cannot figure it all out through sitting and meditating and pondering and thinking. We can't. But somewhere inside, the source of all truth and all love exists as an authority for you, for me, for all of us to discover. And when you discover it, you are faced with a choice. Will you begin to respond to it? Will you be responsible? Are you able to respond to an authority of love? On the planet right now, very, very few are able to respond because they're so angry, they're so distrustful, and with good reason. When you have police officers like what we see, where they take it way too far, to the point where they murder somebody. So then everyone goes, we can't trust. We can't trust that guy. That's for sure. And maybe the other three that were with him didn't have the courage to push the guy off and go, hey, you're killing this man. So they're going to be experiencing negative repercussions as well. But I want to be cautious about fanning the flames of racism, because I don't think that actually helps. Is there racism involved in this country? Yeah, absolutely. We have the other murder of, I think his name was Ahmaud Arbery or something like that. This was a guy who was jogging, and these people in a pickup truck, basically hunt him down and shoot him. That's not an issue of authority, that's an issue of hatred. So we definitely have racism in our country. But I would like you to take this message about authority, and I would like you to recognize the importance of surrendering to the authority of love. Trusting in that, seeing what that looks like. And wherever you have the opportunity to encourage and teach people, especially young men,